Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Pragmatic Data Governance webinar number 34. Today, we are going to be talking about data governance best practices for higher education institutions. Let's hop right into it. As introductions, I am Brian Parish. I'm the CEO and founder of IData. I'm joined on the line, as I usually am, by Jim Wallery, who's our Director of Marketing and is managing the GoToMeeting and the webinar coordination behind the scenes. Welcome, Jim. Thank you for joining again today. So our goals today is we're going to start off with a really quick introduction to data governance best practices. We're trying something a little new this time, in that I think that if you probably recently got an email from Jim, or if not, you'll get one soon, that is a pointer to a recorded webinar that's about 20 minutes long of an overview of data governance and in general, what we mean by it and all that. So it's a good place to start. We're going to touch it briefly in this presentation, but if you want a more in-depth discussion about what is data governance and what do we mean by it, I think that's a good place to start. But then we're going to really focus on these main best practices. And we've recently been doing sort of a session on each one of these best practices. If you want to dive in a little deeper, you can. This is sort of a more quick overview of each one with a little bit of detail. So the first part is creating a framework for data governance that includes sort of your data stewardship and your knowledge base and a communication process. What's sort of the framework with which to implement data governance? And then we're going to talk about how to understanding and prioritizing the content in the data governance, which can be a struggle to figure out where to start and what to focus on. And then we're going to focus on some best practices for just getting started, like how to get started with data governance and how to make that work. And we're going to look at some of the outcomes and goals from data governance, some things that you're striving towards and where those best practices can bring you. And then we'll talk briefly about how the data cookbook can support those all these best practices we're talking about. We're not actually going to get in and do any demo of the data cookbook. If that's what you're expecting, I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for a private demo, or look at some of the other recorded webinars where we do more of that. We will talk a little bit about the cookbook and what it is, though, but most of our time we'll be diving into these overall best practices. All right, so that being said, let me just talk a little bit about the logistics here. We are using GoToMeeting. We've got sort of everyone muted. We don't have any polls today, just for the sake of time. But if you have sort of a question or a chat that you want to put in, you can go ahead and put that in the chat section or the question section, doesn't matter. And Jim will be monitoring that and try to answer. If not, I'll see if I can get to it as we have time. We are recording this webinar, and it will be made available. If you have to drop off, or if you want to share this with somebody within a day or two, you'll get an email for access to listen to the recording or to share the link with someone else. We will also be sending a survey out at the end, and I'll talk about that, or Jim and I will talk about that at the end of the discussion. Okay. A little bit about us. If you're not familiar, IData is a data management firm focused primarily on higher education. We have three main practices. Most of what we're going to be talking about today is our data governance and reporting, things that come out of our data governance and reporting practice, which is these best practices of data governance. We have a product called the Data Cookbook, which is a data governance solution. We have over 600 clients that we work with across all of our practices, around 250 data cookbook, active data cookbook clients. We've also have some growing practice with some healthcare and corporate clients as well for this product. We also have a system integration practice that does play into the data cookbook. We do integrations between the data governance tool and your data systems, which we'll talk about near the end. But we also, you may notice, because we have sort of packaged integration solutions for transactional things like payment plan or CRM and things like that. So if you're interested or struggling with system integration, there's we may be able to help on that front. All of this sort of experience around governance comes out of years of doing technology consulting for higher ed and doing things like custom reporting projects or custom warehousing projects or custom system integration, and really understanding that success or failure in those areas really depends on sort of the process and the people problems and governance. So the tool, the Data Cookbook, came out of doing the work, right? So that's why you'll hear us talk about the pragmatic approach, because that's really what we try to tackle, things that sort of facilitate that work. And so as the introduction, what we try to cover here, and this is something that you can see in that other recorded webinar, is just the breadth of things that you have to deal with in terms of data governance. And when we do the getting started session later, we'll talk about this. But you may be coming at this around your data definitions or business glossary, or you may be coming around this trying to document all of the sort of data deliverables you have in terms of reports or extracts or ETLs or APIs. You may be thinking about your data system inventory. What are all the systems that we have on campus, and what and how does data move back and forth between them, and what's the technical metadata within there? And that's not the business glossary is focused on sort of functional items with technical details to them, but in your data inventory you might have your full data model for everything within each one of those data systems. You might be thinking about the data request process and how data requests contents are managed, or data quality is another thing that people focus on. Data access, who and how do you get access to these systems? A very popular topic right now is data security and privacy. So what are the sort of how do you control it once you have access, and as well as what are you allowed to do with it? What can you share, not share? How do you manage that? And then policies, which is sort of a new thing on this list, but it overarches that people are really looking to sort of track policies, and we'll talk about that and how it fits into the overall thing. So that's the general content that we're talking about in terms of data governance. And as you'll see, the approach that you want to take in the best practices is really to think about what your goals are, and how you might not want to tackle everything at once or not. But the other point on this is with what do we mean by governing, right? What does this mean? So we have the stewardship, which is your stewardship structure we're going to talk about in detail. But that alone is not sufficient. Just saying, oh, I'm in charge of this and that's it. I'll make all the decisions. But there has to be some standard, controlled, and understood processes with which everything, interacts with the stewards and the content and the reporting tools and the people involved, as well as agreed upon and complete information. So how do you get enough content into your around your governance infrastructure to be useful to people and that everybody agrees on? And then how do you get adoption, buy-in, and use of both the governance content that you're creating as well as the tools that it's supporting? So these are the content, the stewardship, processes, completeness, and adoption. So, and I put this on here, of course, not to scare everyone away about the breadth of data governance, but actually really to try to focus you around those things that maybe are important to you at the moment and where you're trying to go. And then you can evolve into the greater set of things. The other thing that I want to start off with is, we have this pragmatic approach. We talk about pragmatic data governance, and in this case, we say data governance is about best practices designed to help people access, understand, connect, protect, and effectively use your organization's data across all systems. You'll see that I just added protect if you've been in any of the other sessions. That's always been sort of implied, but I thought I would explicitly state it because I know that's an important thing for people these days. But the real important words in this sentence is this help people, right? So our focus is that you want governance to facilitate the use of your data, right? And if you focus too much on the protection, right, it can stand in the way of that. And again, this is a topic we'll talk about. So lastly, the thing that's important to understand, and I go into more detail again in this other webinar, is that governance is something that involves a large array of stakeholders. So you've got your data consumers and requesters like Connie here. You've got your analysts and report creators like Dave, Charter. We also have Bill to reports, that's another guy we have. And your data stewards, so you have functional ones like Marcy, she's a data steward over the finance area, but she might not be super technical, or maybe she is, but you might have also technical data stewards who support her, like John and Deb. And then you have your data managers and leadership. Maybe it's a chief data officer, maybe it's your director of IR, maybe it's a head of BI, but people who are sort of helping to organize and manage the stewardship community and the data governance processes, so like Reese here. So those are the set of people involved. So lastly, you have additional technical system resources that may include any developer on your system, but people who can contribute additional information about the technical details, or maybe report writing. All right, so that's the background. So let's talk about the major best practices. So the first is, in order to do data governance, you really need to create some sort of framework for which to hang it upon, right? Whatever, from whatever piece you want to focus on. So that framework really starts with defining and establishing stewardship, establishing a data governance knowledge base, and establish a communication process that supports just-in-time data governance. All right, so let's go into each one of these and talk about what are the best practices behind them for that framework. So in the define and establish stewardship, you might call it by a lot of different names. Maybe it's a data moderator or a data council or data coordinator. We often talk about data stewardships or data moderators, but it doesn't really matter. These are talking about people who are able to sort of make governance decisions around the content involved with your data. So one of the things as you think about stewardship is to understand that you have to pick the people very deliberately for their strengths, right, and play into their expertise, right. So some people may have business rule expertise that they can say, like, oh, I'm a registrar and I know all about the business of the business rules and the functional business glossary definitions and how we use our data and all those types of things. But they may not have technical system expertise of your student information system, right? Or maybe they do, and that's okay. Like, so you want to think about like who are the people who can sort of span this. Like, you're going to not have a whole lot of success in their stewardship if you ask people to make decisions or take actions on things that are outside of their comfort zone or their level of expertise. So think about the business rule expertise over your different data domains or your different functional areas. Think about your technical system expertise over the different systems within those functional areas, and then governance oversight, like who's doing things like setting the vision or designing process or managing the queues of things as we'll get to talk about that in the process and workflow. So the other thing you want to think about is that you may or may not be able to apply all those same stewards across all the content that you have. So ideally you can, like that's the ideal situation, is you've got people who are fairly robust in their experience, but are they going to be able to do things like do business glossary data definitions or manage data inquiries and requests or approve or review specifications or design for reports and extracts and integrations, or do data quality issue resolution, or create and define data quality rules, or manage reference data lists, or work on your data system inventory or technical metadata, or manage security and access and privacy codes. So you want to think about as you're defining your stewardship where those roles are. Of course, it's also going to depend on what you're focusing on. Again, as I said, we'll talk about later. We don't encourage people to start with all of these things at once. But one of our experience on best practices with governance is that if you assign people again to be in charge of things that they're not comfortable with or haven't been trained in or don't understand, you're not going to get a whole lot of success. So we have you can create sort of a simple matrix for your governance around the business areas and functional and technical resources. And again, you could have the same person in multiple buckets, and that's fine. Or you could have a fairly complicated one. So over like your student records technical system and your human resources, the technical system, or there may be a different person who's in charge of understanding the technical details for your student information system, as opposed to the person who understands where it is in your warehouse or your retention. So think about that as you specify this. It's also the other recommendation I don't have here is to really think about things in terms of roles and not just people. Like, people matter, right? But notice that people are going to come and go from their positions and come and go from your organization. So you might want to match this up by role or office rather than just an individual. So that's a little background on the governance piece, right? So the stewardship best practices. So now we're going to talk about establishing the data governance knowledge base as part of the framework. So the first thing is you want to define that stewardship. Again, another best practice is you don't have to do everything at once. You can just try this in the enrollment area or whatever and show something that works. So establishing a data governance knowledge base is the next thing. So where are you going to put all this information that you're capturing? So a couple of things. It needs to be open to all consumers and creators, right? So it's not just a tool to be used by your report writers. It's also something that can be accessed by people who are looking at reports or trying to understand your data or doing self-service kind of reporting or trying to find answers to things by like what reports exist or other information. Sorry, that repeated slide here. So the knowledge-based content, we're going to go over this, and this sort of matches what you saw originally, but the knowledge base is designed to be a repository for all this different type of information. So your business glossary, your catalog of reports, and your data system inventory, your data models and lineage and data quality, reference data. Maybe you've got sort of standards definition information about data access and security. Your data requests can flow through there if you have a fairly mature process. Change management, understanding when things have changed and version and all that, and then possible integration, how it connects to other systems. So as you think about and build out your content in a knowledge base, you want to be able to have a repository in there for all of these components. So some people, and many clients of ours, they start doing this originally if they've decided they want to do data governance, they'll build some of these things in spreadsheets or websites or other sort of tools, ticketing systems to keep tracks of things, and that's great if you have that content started. But there's a certain point where that begins to break down in terms of a knowledge base to track all this content. And one of the reasons is that first of all, it needs to be sort of available to everyone. So if you're just sort of keeping it in some sort of spreadsheet on some sort of file, and how accessible is that to your consumer who's trying to understand a report, or all these different users. So it needs to be available and open to all the users. That's one issue. Maybe you can accomplish that with websites and things. I'll come back to the slide in a second. Well, I'll go ahead. I was leading up to something that comes later, but so how are people going to be using this knowledge base? You have to think about it, and so that includes the types of things that people will do is they might go searching for information, right? For various reasons. Do reports exist or definitions exist? Then if they don't find something, they may be requesting, so submitting a request for a new data deliverable, a new report or an answer, right? They may be defining, so they may be going in there and adding data definitions or business glossary items and interacting with it that way. They may be approving. Someone else has done that. Now I'm going to go approve something that's in that knowledge base. Building, they may be creating like if a spec has been created, I'm going to go look at that spec and go build something based on that information that was there. Delivering, now I've delivered that, I'm going to deliver my report. I'm going to have the documentation for that report in the knowledge base, or the documentation for the API. There may be testing happening so someone who I've delivered a report, now I'm iterating on that and I'm sort of updating the requirements or the process, or at least I have the details on what this report is supposed to do in my knowledge base, right? Once I'm finally done with this, I've iterated that documentation that in theory should have also been part of testing is now available. Like I could just document items in the knowledge base for the users to see. I might also be copying. So another thing you could do in the knowledge base, I'm going to go in, I'm going to create another report, I'm going to create a new definition. I'm going to find things that already exist, right? And that's the real goal, like start from that, make a copy and make a change, So it needs to be something that, like a good code library that you can take and borrow and copy from. I might also be sharing. I might have created something and I got asked by another institution or another department who wants to have access to this information. I want to be able to share that information with other people. So there you go. That's sort of the uses of this by your different stakeholders that will be involved. The other thing is that a knowledge base, you might want to think about a knowledge base as not being entirely like all the information to be locked solely in that knowledge base. So if you have people like Connie who are trying to, who are looking at reports and want to understand what it means, right? Do they have to go to some, stored file system or website to get that other information? Or is it available in the tool that they're using, right? So maybe it's something that's embedded into the reporting tool for a link to the documentation, or something else that's embedded in that process that is synchronized with your knowledge base. Or it's something that your ticketing system can interact with if you're talking about the request process. Or you might be able to search data definitions or search for reports from within your other student portals or faculty or internal websites or portals, rather than, again, having everyone have to go to this knowledge base, particularly if it's some sort of distributed set of information in CSVs and Google Docs and things like that. So that's another thing to think about in best practices, is that a knowledge base that stores all this content should be accessible in various ways. So we have a question here. Let me check that. I'm hearing that we're losing the sound. I don't know if someone wants to comment. I'll scoot a little closer to the phone. and let me know if we're still getting problems. All right. The other useful thing in the knowledge base is to manage versioning and approvals and comments. So being able to sort of track your change history of items in there and make sure that it's a living document, it's a living knowledge base that will expand over time. Let's see if I comment here if the sound is okay. Sound has been fine, right? You also want to have be able to have things get approved and rejected. So anyone can sort of contribute content with the appropriate permissions, but that might go to the stewards for approval and review and editing, right? So having some sort of status of this is the official definition or this is something that's in progress is important. And then you might want to allow and show comments. So we have like this particular definition is, someone's going to ask a question on it, or you can sort of retain sort of comment thread, or you can interact with it. So that's some best practices to have within your knowledge base as well. Now, lastly, and this is where I was heading before, and I should remember next time to move this slide up, is that you have all this content, and if you have taken the approach, which I applaud you if you have so far, to document these things, but you have them in a whole bunch of different things like spreadsheets and Word docs and websites, that it's important to note that at some point you realize that all this content is really connected, right? So you have definitions that refer to other definitions, or you have definitions that refer to your technical metadata, or you have data quality attributes that refer to your reference data lists, or sort of collections of things like a dashboard that connect to specifications for individual report or charts and things like that. So or definitions that are on reports, and it just goes on. So all these pieces are connected, and what you want to have is that when you change something, you only want to have to change it in one place. So if I have a definition that's like active student or whatever that's used on 50 reports, and I change that definition, I shouldn't have to go modify all 50 reports, right? So that's one feature, like helping them just change it in one place. But the other thing is you should be informed if I make a change to that definition, what are those 50 reports? And someone has to go look at them and figure out if there's any impact on them. Or when I make a change, I should be able to say whether or not there's impact. So that's one of the first reasons that people sort of, when they're looking at a knowledge base, they quickly realize that they're outgrowing their homegrown version of this, that having things that are connected. The first is that they sort of aren't able to really keep it up to date. And it's sort of part of a process, and it's languishing in whatever repository it is that's not very open. But the second thing is that now, like if they're using it well, that they don't have the interconnectivity that's important to making it really useful. Right. The last thing is to create a communication process, the last sort of part of your framework. So you've got your data stewards, you've got some sort of repository for all the content, and now you need some communication process to support what we call just-in-time data governance, right? So how do people interact with this content, right, and interact, with the overall process in your institution? So it should, and this is a bit of an advanced thing, but support the data request process. So if people, while they're doing data requests, or while people are answering questions about data or looking at data, if they're interacting with your knowledge base, if they're interacting with governance, right, then they're going to continue to add to the content and get the answers they need when they need it, and it'll grow with every question being asked. But it also should support your data steward activity, right? So this is where the real just-in-time thing comes in. So if I'm someone who's looking to answer, trying to find some information on data definitions so I can build my own report in self-service, and I can't figure it out, like how it doesn't really pay to wait, for this to come along for some committee to meet later. So I need that answer now. So how do I interact? So let's talk about that. What do we mean by just-in-time data governance? So we have a couple sessions on this, actually 2 different sessions, hour-long sessions, if you want to dive into the whole detail of just-in-time data governance and how it fits in the data request process and tricks to structure it. But one of the most common mistakes that people make is they set up a data governance and they define a stewardship committee, and then they determine that the best way for that committee to interact with everything is through meetings, right? So they get together with everybody in one room and they hypothetically review data definitions, or they review hypothetical data definitions, right? In terms of like, there's not actual questions being asked, or just like thinking about terms off a list or whatever. And that's a pretty big waste of time for most of the people, as well as a not very effective way to get good answers and to get answers timely, right? So the better way to think about this is to take this just-in-time approach, that there's questions that are being asked and answered every day on your campus, and is governance part of that? Like, do the people who need information or are looking at information or asking questions, can they find the advice or the resources they need, right? And this is an important point, that data governance, it's not a project. This is not something that you design as a document that gets put on a shelf. It's something that's a part of, a simple, hopefully, and small, hopefully, part of day-to-day tasks for people interacting with data. So think of it as, just-in-time data governance is a practical approach to implementing data governance directly into your existing processes. So the way people request data, the way people review data, the way people learn about data, the way people ask about data, all that kind of stuff, the way people build things and document things, like have governance be a part of that process as they do it, and have that be facilitated within the framework. So the goals of this is, to give people access to the information they need to use the data appropriately and effectively when they need it, to support direct and immediate involvement of all necessary data stakeholders where needed in your data process, to give users ways to report problems or request information when it comes up, to create processes that foster collaboration, communication, and sharing between people so that people aren't siloing all their knowledge. Create tools that notify and alert people when there are changes to data that have impact on their work, or changes to definitions or policies or things like that. And then focus on facilitating the use of data, not stopping the use. So, how do we, there's also just-in-time importance around stopping, right? You can't have access to the data, or no, you're not supposed to share that, right? And there are things you can do around stopping. But if you think about use and how to facilitate that, it's very helpful. And then lastly, you also want to think about keeping it simple, which may seem like an oxymoron, or if that's the right phrase, from what I've said, because this might seem kind of complicated, but you can do this in simple ways, right? You don't have to have incredibly complicated workflows. You can have things that are really just about, who is the right person I have to ask at this point in time, and how do I get a hold of them, and how do I notify them? And if you're doing it on your own, you can do this with just a contact list or whatever. But if you have a workflow process like we have in our tool, it can facilitate that process. All right, so now we've sort of gone through those primary framework best practices, that you want to have data stewardship defined in some capacity, and you want to have a knowledge base, a repository that you're comfortable with and facilitates those data governance, and then you want to have some processes with which people can interact with the stewards and the knowledge base and the data in effective ways. So let's talk about the actual content of data governance and how you sort of understand the breadth of it and prioritize it. And we've shown it a couple times, so let's look at it again with a little bit more information. So here's where we have sort of classified all the different content that you may be looking to deal with in governance. So you have your data dictionary business glossary that includes both functional and technical definitions within them. So what that means is I have a definition that I want to define, the business definition for, AR aging on a receivable, right? Accounts receivable aging. And I have a functional definition for what that means, like, oh, this is the number of days since the invoice date or whatever. And then a technical definition. So if I want to pull that, for the different data systems that I have my receivables in, maybe it's my finance system, and maybe it's also my data warehouse. I have built reports that I'm going to build out of that. I want to have explanation about how I get AR aging out of both of those systems, and the technical definitions should be equivalent, right, to the functional definition, right? But they might have very different ways they're pulled out of the systems. So that's the one sort of content. And for each one of these, again, we have webinars that go into the specifics of some best practices around how to track and manage and build up this content, as well as how to use it in the data cookbook. So I encourage you to go look at that. We're just going to sort of move through these pretty quickly. You also have the data deliverables catalog, right? So this is something where you want to figure out what do you want to document, either as before you create it or after it's created, or both, of the reports that you have, or ways data moves throughout your system. And this is a bit of a thing that's confusing to people. I talk about this data deliverables catalog, but this is sort of anything that you have that's a process related to your data. So how data is, and again, it's like reports or ETL processes or surveys and things coming in and out of your system, as opposed to the data sort of in rest. The data in rest is mainly managed in their data system inventory, right? So this is somewhere where you sort of have two levels. You can document things at a system level about the existence of this system. We have our student information system, and that's a very big thing. But we also have the census data extract that's run by IR, and we also have this, spreadsheet that's kept by this finance person who, does this fancy calculation twice a year to send some information over. So knowing about the existence of all of those and what the purpose of them are and how people, that's an important thing to do from an inventory standpoint. And then on top of that, you can document the sort of the technical data models that are inside of them. So, all the fields and tables and stored procs and everything that's in your student information system, maybe everything that you've got in your census data extract, that maybe you've got that in SAS or SPSS or something. And then the details of that spreadsheet is also kind of important, right? If you want to understand that. So that's the type of stuff that goes in the data system inventory. Data lineage, then, this is actually sort of an attribute of your data system, but it's related to the deliverable. So this is how data is flowing between these items, right? So what data is moving from one system to another. And you could start at a very high level of just, what systems are connected, and then you can get down to tables and field level too. And we usually document those as, if you've got your ETL document, that's going to define the lineage there. The data request process is another set of content. So, you can be doing this externally of your knowledge base, but you can also track the requests and queues and calendars and recurring events and sort of the project management of these items. And you can use it to actually understand, how are we tracking in, in response times and all that kind of stuff, or when is the critical times for the number of requests and processes that we have. So that's another piece of content. Data quality, so this is where you define all your data quality rules, or you can have assessments of your data quality, and you can also create sort of data quality monitoring and issue resolution. Issue resolution is an important process to be able to build up trust in your data. And again, we have a whole session on this. And you can start thinking about or seeing the interconnectivity. Like, to really understand data quality, you kind of maybe need to understand the business glossary and what's in the data system. And those two things may be combined there. Reference data management is another set of content. And this is how you keep track of sort of your valid values or your lists of data, or even sort of inventory type data if you want. But these might be like, these are my registration statuses, or these are my valid term codes, or my degree codes, or my GL numbers, or whatever. And the interesting thing about that is to think of those also as my sort of functional definition, and these are the codes as we think of them at the institution, or what you might call a master list of these codes. And then they may be represented differently in different data systems, and there needs to be a translation between them, like up to the master or between the systems. So that's a challenge and content that you have to think about. So, and another thing you could put in your system. Workflows is a part of this. So how does the notifications happen and all that? That's part of it's really a process. And then the integrations we talked about, this might be something that's that's a part of your content, is how these things connect to your systems, documentation, and everything. But data policies is the other real content piece. So this is where you might be documenting your data access to your data system, security, what your data sharing agreements and policies are, privacy codes, what they mean, right? And these also might be attributes that are tied to your data system inventory or to your business glossary, right? So if you have a policy around what privacy codes are and what they mean and what they apply to, then you can actually tag the specific business glossary items and the specific data system items with those privacy codes. But data policies are things that people won't need access to centrally, that change over time, and so you can think of them as part of your your content and your data governance, as not as like something outside that drives governance, but it's content that evolves and changes over time too. We already talked about change management and the dependency and how that you change one thing, like the relationship between these items is also part of the content. And then lastly, the standard data. So if you've got IPEDS definitions, or the state of Georgia's definitions for things, whatever that might be, to understand those, and that might be valued either to contain those inside your knowledge base, or at least to have links to those that other information. And the last thing I didn't say also about data system inventory is that another sort of external thing that you can have is documentation around your product. So it might also be an interesting place within this data governance thing, within your data system inventory, to be a central place where you might store documentation about your student information system or your CRM or your data warehouse or whatever. So it's just a repository for documentation. And that might include links to, external documentation or to training or whatever. All right, so that's all of your content. And as I mentioned, each one of these things has their own sort of best practice webinar that we did, and there's lots of details about how you do that. But it's important to think about all this content. Now, many of you, I can't hear any of you, you're all muted, but many of you may be sitting there saying, oh my gosh, how am I possibly going to do that? And I've said this a couple times, you don't have to do it all at once. So how do you sort of think about prioritizing these things? So the first thing to do is to think about the problems you're trying to solve, right? So why are you implementing governance at all? Is it because people aren't using your data? People don't trust your data? People think that there's data quality problems? Nobody understands your data well enough to build anything? Or you are actually getting wrong numbers or dueling data, or all these types of issues that are causing problems around either use or execution or timeliness or effort or whatever. So think about what those problems are and try to identify what those are. And then those are the dog, right, that wags the tail instead of the tail that wags the dog. So once you sort of, set up you want to set your data governance goals around what content and what part of the framework you want to focus your energy on. You set those priorities based on what problems they'll solve. All right. So you really want to prioritize which content you focus on first based on the impact on those defined problems, right? So if your defined problem is about reporting, people understanding the data, like you probably shouldn't spend a whole lot of time on the data quality to start, right? Because that's not really going to solve that main problem. Maybe if the problem is that no one trusts the data because everybody thinks data quality is wrong, is bad, then that might be where you want to focus. So start on the things that have impact. But you also, though, need to weigh in the feasibility. Like, is this something that you have the buy-in or capability of the appropriate stakeholders? Is this something that the team you're working on can do? Do you have the budget and time to get that done? I mean, data quality is a pretty complicated, it's out of the list of things, probably one of the bigger ones. So that'll help you prioritize what you want to do. The next is the desire of the team. And I said this a little bit before, but if you can find things that people are excited about and that are also have impact and they're feasible, focus on those. You're not going to, one of the gumption traps, as they say, of any data governance initiative is to give people stuff to do to start that they don't want to do, right? So if you can find things that people are excited about, even if it maybe isn't the highest impact, right? But you have to sort of start building up that base to build upon. And then return on investment, right? And that goes to the impact and how much the effort and cost. But these are things to think about on how to prioritize these things. But remember, you don't have to solve it all at once. All right. So I talk a little bit. This is all like a lot towards getting started, but we're going to go in a little bit more detail on best practices for getting started with data governance. So the first thing is to sort of set pragmatic goals, and we already talked about prioritizing the content. But one of the things I think a mistake that people set into is that they start off with policy or to create charters or to focus entirely on process and without having an actual project or deliverable to do. So if you actually have a project, like let's say, hey, we're gonna build out the data dictionary to document all of our enrollment data because we're implementing a new CRM, or we've got this data warehouse project that we're doing and we want to focus on that, or we have an alumni campaign that's happening and we want to have build good reporting for that, and we want to document some reports and definitions and things for that. So or we're focusing on GDPR and we have to tag everything in our databases around our campus that include GDPR privacy status, right? So those are the things that having a real project to apply these things to, and someone's taping something outside of my office. I love the sound of tape. So having that project to apply the best practices to is a really good way to start. And do not expect success if all your discussions are sort of hypothetical, policy without application or definitions without use, right? Don't really focus on, again, or think about, like, the outcome is not a binder on a shelf. Like, that's not your whole initiative. This is something that people will use to facilitate the process. All right, so another thing that is a big hindrance in getting started is politics. All right, so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is, data governance by design. We talk about it. People talk about it at their school. It's this enterprise-wide collaboration project, right? It's something that we want to institute data governance across our whole organization, right? And one of the big problems is people get started and suddenly everybody all over the place has their own opinions about what their priorities are and what they should do and what tools you should use and what policies they should create. So it's like, how do you start an enterprise-wide collaboration project when your enterprise does not agree on how to start, right? So most people feel like they have to get buy-in from everybody in the whole world to do this to start off, and that just kills many things. So but doing things on your own without approval can also create political problems or things that maybe are incompatible with what other people do. So how do you do this? There's really sort of three main approaches. You can look at a top-down approach where this initiative by edict. So this is where something where your enterprise-wide decision is made at the top level, and that can be very valuable if you've got that kind of buy-in and influence to start. But that may not be where you are at in your organization, right? So the other is a bottom-up approach, or what I call the rogue approach, where you lead by example. So this is where one division or one department or even one person can decide to implement some governance practices that they will be sharing with their others around them, or like I'm documenting my own reports, or I'm creating definitions for the things that I create, or and I'm, all that kind of stuff. But you can begin doing that in one group, and then show the success of that and have that spread through sort of virally or organically. Or a hybrid approach where you might get sort of limited support for your effort from the top, but it's not something that is that everyone has to do, right? That is like sort of a knowledge pilot, or that they're support of this, but it's going to be proven out, a proof of concept, or a initial beta and drive in one area. So this is what I call the hybrid approach, where you have a bottom-up initiative, lead by example with cover from the top, but not everyone in the institution has to do that, right? And that can sort of help set that. The other thing is to start with things that are not controversial. So a lot of people want to start with policy, and that's where you can run into a lot of issues, right? So if you think about things that don't cause a lot of that everyone can sort of agree on, or that are broadly applicable, right? I'll talk about this later, but I sort of see the data inventory not for both from both the dictionary definition side as well as the data system inventory, like the technical inventory and the business glossary inventory, as a fairly non-controversial place to start. And we'll talk more about that later. Lastly is managing the scope. So we talked about this briefly as well a minute ago, but governance is something that's shared and standardized across your entire organization. But how do you decide the scope to start in your organization? And I do feel like unless you have that top-down edict, regulatory kind of support for this, and even when you do, it's good to start the scope in a limited way. So you can start with one department or a handful department or one area of your organization, and then grow it and expand it based on the success that you see there and people getting excited about the outcomes. So one recommended path for a content method, this is just one path. It really depends on where you're going, but this is something that I sort of see as potential success, is you want to determine your initial data governance content for best practices. Like, all right, we're going to focus on, what do you want to focus on to start? Maybe if you buy into my pitch that the inventory is important, maybe you want to start with the dictionary and your inventory, right? Determine your champions and what organizations are excited about doing it. Enrollment really wants to do it, so let's have them start it. Create some initial data stewards group, right? Maybe you can co-opt an existing group that's already focused on security or an ERP implementation or something, and use those folks, or just create a committee around the organizational scope you're starting. Select the knowledge-based tool that you're going to use, a framework to put that on. Identify sort of a simple communication process for the stewardship within that framework, right? So a tool like the Data Cookbook sort of has that out of the box, but if you're going to use your own spreadsheets, how do you manage that? How do you manage requests and approval and all that kind of stuff, and updating of it? But then we want to get into content. So I recommend, as just one recommended path again, is that start with that data system inventory within the scope area, right? So figure out what are the data systems that we have, that you can sort of figure out how to bring in the technical metadata from that, or documentation around that technical metadata. Why do I say to start with that? First of all, it's like, it's an important aspect of this, right? And but it's also easier in lots of ways. Like, it's just a known thing. Like, we know these are the systems, and here's the data, the technical metadata that we have in all these systems, and you can bring that in, and suddenly you've, pretty quickly created a whole bunch of content, right? That hasn't required a lot of thought, right? Maybe there's still effort to kind of like seek down and track down the little shadow systems that you have, but at least of the things that it's a good place to start. Now you want to start populating your data dictionary, right? So if you've got things that you can import, existing stuff, that you can seed it with that you've already gotten. If you have some known definitions that you really want, you can go do that. Another place to really start is to pick 10 or 20 critical data deliverables of your institution, like maybe your fact books or if you're focused on enrollment, certain enrollment reports. Document those data deliverables. As part of that, document the definitions within them, and that'll really help seed your data dictionary and also create some content in your data deliverables repository. But focus on that, and with some governance structure around that. Once you have that built, then think about implementing a data request process, right? Because there's better models and focuses in there. Then you might want to create the data policy repository. So create those policies. Now you may choose to put policy first if that's the thing that you've decided your prioritization. But I think creating the inventory and having this information, and then you can create a policy that you can apply that inventory. Like I mentioned, GDPR and privacy. Like if I create a privacy policy that says, all data of this particular sort of type or use, needs to be tagged it's considered private, and then you can't do X, Y, and Z. Like that's really great, but without that inventory, we don't have anything to go apply that policy to. We don't have anything to mark as private and work. So I think if you can do inventory first, or parallel at least, if you focus on policy, it can really hang you up a bit. The next is to tackle data quality. So data quality can be really important, but in some ways, again, like having that inventory in place first can help build on that. Now, there's stuff that you can do with quality as you go, like as you define things, you can say, what are the valid values, or is this required, or sample data, or whatever. You can do that as you go, but major data quality issues are not. One exception to that, if data quality is a real problem, think about implementing a quality issue resolution process. So having a place for people to report data quality problems is probably not a complicated thing, and that will help to figure out what you want to do from a quality monitoring. And then last thing is to just continue to expand the scope and expand the content. So this is one recommended path, and please don't take this as gospel, but this is something that I see as successful, again, focusing on sort of non-controversial things first to get things started. All right, so now we've gotten through these general best practices. We've talked about all the content and the framework and some other ways to get started. So what are some of the outcomes that you can get from this, and what are the things that you want to focus on or strive towards as you do governance, or to help you make the case for it? All right, so one is to build trust in your data and your data deliverables. This is always something that can stop people up front. I call it, where the heck do these numbers come from use case. And so if you can have better documentation and governance and resources for people to look things up and transparency, it's really going to help with people trusting the information. And trust helps build use, right? Because if people don't trust it, no matter how expensive your data warehouse is, they're not going to use it, right? So the other outcome is creating a clear path from question to answer. This is sort of a catchphrase that we have, but it means something. So if I have a question that I want to ask, I want to try to understand, why our enrollment has dropped by 10% in the in a particular program. How am I going to start? What questions am I going to ask? And if I ask a question, where do I go? So a good data governance structure and a good knowledge base and support the ability to sort of interact with stewards can facilitate self-service reporting, either by knowing where to find reports to run that have already been written, or to build my own if I have access to that. And an effective data request process. So having data governance that includes data requests, or even if it doesn't, data requests are going to be more successful if people are getting using the same definitions and getting the same answers and are not restarting all their projects over again. So one of the big outcomes is having an effective data request and response process that and a path and a forward for people with questions and to do self-service. The creation of that inventory, I said I talk about this more, is in its own way an outcome and a benefit. So, if you have this inventory of your data systems and a usage that includes things like definitions, this can support policy decisions and action. So as I mentioned, the creation of policy around privacy, if you have an inventory, you can apply that now to this inventory and tag things and then figure out how to take action on it. Security as well, understanding of your data, if you have policy or issues with that, adoption of your data, efficiency of your response, the accuracy of your data quality, all these sort of actions or needs are supported by having a better inventory of your information that's the single, everybody agrees this is all the data that we have and what things mean. And so I see, and I said this already, that the inventory is this non-controversial deliverable, right? There might be some argument about who gets to do it or who doesn't get to do it, which may be a more meaningful debate. But all of these policy initiatives can use a good inventory, so it's a good place to start and a good best practice to focus on that. Lastly is to think about the return on investment of all these things. So the stuff around efficiency or applicability of regulatory requirements like GDPR or FERPA or other things. So we have a great 30-minute webinar if you want to watch on, I think there's 11 return on investment things that you can use to understand the value of implementing governance that you can, if you're having trouble sort of making the case for it, that can help. So think about that we believe strongly that there is a return on investment, just like, if you were saying, before that, we have all these IT projects and it's all sort of a mess. Like, I think we all can mostly agree that there is a return on investment to implementing good project management around that, right? This is the same sort of thing. Like, how, there is to put data management, data governance around the use of your data has a positive return on investment. You get better results, more efficiency, better action, better trust, better use, all those types of things. So there we go. How can the data cookbook help with all of these processes, right? So we're not going to go into a whole demo or anything, but if you're curious about the product, it's a software as a service application. It's designed to be this enterprise-wide knowledge base. It facilitates this entire framework. It's this robust data governance knowledge base that supports all that content. It allows for simple searching of the data usage and the meaning. It has built-in data governance workflows to manage all the process. It allows for unlimited users with a single sign-on with your organization. It has API integration to embed it in other systems, as well as an enterprise service bus for connecting it to your data systems. Here's some of the screenshots for it. The IData Hub, that's our enterprise service bus that we deliver with it. All stakeholders can interact with the system, so it's something that Connie and Dave and John and Deb and Reese, all the stewards and the DBAs and the business office folks can all use it if they want. But at the same time, you don't have to use it. So because we have those APIs, if Connie doesn't have to have a login to the cookbook, she can interact by having links in a Tableau report that pop up the information through the API right where she is, so she can see the details just in time of that report. And we have that integration for lots of different products. It's a fairly simple API to implement. We also, a brand new feature that we have coming out is sort of embedding in the ticketing systems, the ways for ticketing systems to communicate with it, so that if they don't have to sort of go do a report request in the knowledge base if they're doing all their other requests in ServiceNow or whatever. So they can use that, and it will initiate the report requests and the detail in the cookbook for someone to deal with, and then it'll inform back the ticketing system that request has been done. Or as I mentioned, it can have sort of an embedding in your portal, and that feature is supported by the product, so people can search for definitions or data deliverables in other tools by using the APIs. And so all of the sort of content that we talked about is supported within the cookbook. We also have things like this, it's very searchable. We do have integrations with your data systems, user roles and permissions. We have the change management process that if something changes, it gives you an impact analysis. We have a data cookbook community, and then we also offer services. So let's talk about that briefly. Well, on the integration side, the system sits in between, the service bus sits in between, and it does your metadata synchronization and reference data valid value synchronization and your data quality monitoring, and in the future, more reporting tool connectors. So services. So we have a whole reporting and data governance consulting group that can help you outside of, we can help you implement the data cookbook if you're going down that route, but we can also do sort of data management preparedness assessments, like where you are in the organization, and help you do some change management planning within your organization. We can do sort of data governance engagement to focus, help you manage and focus around these initiatives or set priorities. And then we can work specifically with units like your IR group or your IT group to do, to implement some governance within their own organization and our specific cookbook implementations. All right, so I think that takes us to the end. We have a couple minutes. if you're looking for more information, you can go to idating.com or the datacookbook.com. There's on idating.com/recorded webinars, recorded-webinars. All the other webinars I talked about are available there. That's idating.com/recorded-webinars, and you can check those out and watch those. We're sending out a survey at the end of this. I'd love to have your feedback. This is the first time we've done this. I apologize for some of the slides mistakes I have there. Jim will edit it out, I think, the presentation. But we have in the survey, I would look for your feedback on this as well as other things that you might be interested in. If you're interested in getting the follow-up from us on the cookbook, you can note it there, or you can also just go to the website and click on the schedule a private demo discussion or submit a question. But also, if you're interested in having a free 1-hour consultation with Sean, who leads our data governance consulting group, to just bounce ideas off or talk about what you're planning to do with governance, and it's a good session to really hear about what other people are doing and for us to hear about what you guys are doing. So I encourage you to select that option and get that free consultation. Again, there's lots more information on our website. There's other videos, and the pricing information is right there. The Data Cookbook community is, you can interact with it at community.datacookbook.com, where we have sort of standards, definitions, and things that people share. You don't have to be a cookbook member to interact, to access it and even download some of the information. If you do have a Data Cookbook account, you can actually import that stuff and interact with the community with your own repository. So all of these features, the dictionary, the data request tool, the workflow engine, the sort of project management specification tool, data system inventory and documentation archive, data quality tool, configuration management database to manage track changes, and the enterprise service bus, all those things are part of the cookbook and iData Hub. If you were going to try to do any one of these things on their own, they can be very expensive to go purchase any one of these products. We wrap all those all together and what we think is a very affordable price. Like everything all told is $24K a year. Without the integration suite 19. If you want to go down to the knowledge, it doesn't include anything around the data quality or the technical metadata. It's all sort of narrative information around dictionaries and repositories. That's $9K a year, so even super repository, with a one-time implementation fee where we do training as well as data governance services and project management. So that's it. That, I think, takes us to the end of the session. I'm going to let Jim wrap up. If you had to drop off, see you later. You can watch the rest of it later. Thanks, Jim. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Just want to let everyone know that there is many ways to connect with us. We do have a LinkedIn company page. Feel free to follow us, and we'll keep you informed on upcoming events and webinars and stuff like that. Do have 2 Twitter accounts. So if you're a Twitterer, please follow us at iData Inc. or at Data Cookbook. And we do have a YouTube channel, the Data Cookbook. That's where we have probably about 30 or 40 webinars or videos on data governance, and as well as Data Cookbook demos and that type of stuff. And we do have a blog. Feel free to follow us on our blog. As Brian mentioned, we do have a survey. Please fill that out. We're always trying to improve our webinar offering. We do have quite a few webinars, and we're starting to schedule some more webinars over the summer and working on our fall webinar schedule. So if there's topics that you'd really be interested in, feel free to let us know in the survey, and we'll consider it. If you are interested in the Sean Mallon or the Data Cookbook demo, please mention that in the survey. And if you're not really sure who to contact at iData, you can always email me at marketing@idatainc.com. Little things like, hey, I couldn't find the recording, or I want a copy of the presentation. Those are good. That's a good email to do to get that information from me. So, all right, that's it from us. So, Brian, I'll pass it back to you if you have any final thoughts.
No, that's it. I really appreciate everyone's time joining us on this call, and look forward to talking to you in the future. If you do want to know more about the Data Cookbook product and demo, as Jim said, you can see some videos online, but the main action I'd love you to take is to go sign up for a private demo, and we can go ahead and get that scheduled. All right, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week.